That day, Eriri asked Utaha about the script she wrote, wondering why she changed the number of girls in the pool from 2 to 5. Utaha explained that after visiting the location, she got a lot of new ideas. Eriri scolded Utaha for making such a drastic change on a whim because it meant additional illustrations as a consequence. Utaha then pointed out that Eriri hadn't even drawn anything yet and that she was aware Eriri's drawing schedule was slightly behind. Eriri blamed it on Utaha's messy concept. Utaha argued that her concept was clearly written down and even included a detailed description of the swimsuit worn by Kareri, the blonde-haired protagonist. However, Eriri protested that describing her as scrawny, flat-chested, and wearing padded swimwear was just wrong. Utaha merely described what she had in mind, but Eriri insisted that the body shape should have been decided when they discussed the character design. Eriri was also confused about why Hibaragoka's waist suddenly became slimmer when it was originally supposed to be wide as per Eriri's design. Utaha simply said she didn't recall ever approving such a design. Eriri argued that design rights belonged to the illustrator, and she wouldn't let an ordinary writer interfere with her work. Meanwhile, Megumi and Tomoya just watched Eriri and Utaha bickering. Megumi commented that since Utaha's script was already being worked on and Eriri's illustrations weren't too late, they were still on schedule. Megumi wondered why Utaha and Eriri always fought whenever they met. Tomoya explained that the two of them had known each other before he recruited them, and had been arguing since the beginning. Megumi then practiced dialogue with Tomoya, but when Megumi read the protagonist's line calling him deaf and dumb, Tomoya got annoyed. A year ago in the library, Utaha saw that her light novel was available on the shelf and immediately knew it was because of Tomoya. As she walked down the school hallway alone, Eriri suddenly called out to her. Surprisingly, Utaha recognized Eriri's name. Eriri felt honored that Utaha knew who she was and referred to her as the long-haired Ice Queen. Utaha admitted that she didn't like being called such a weird nickname. Eriri then advised Utaha not to associate with a junior who was also a nerd, referring to the time she saw Utaha talking with Tomoya on the school rooftop. Utaha dismissed it, saying Eriri must have mistaken her for someone else, but Eriri insisted that they were talking about the book Metronome of Love and was sure she wasn't mistaken. Utaha asked what was so wrong about her hanging out with Tomoya. Eriri said that both Utaha and Tomoya were nerds, and she found it unfortunate that Utaha, the Queen of Light novels, was associating with an idiotic nerd like Tomoya, who could potentially ruin her reputation. Utaha didn't mind being insulted herself, but she refused to let Eriri use her as an excuse to insult Tomoya. This made Eriri angry, and she asked if Utaha liked Tomoya. Utaha didn't care and chose not to answer, walking away instead. Eriri then shouted that Tomoya didn't like Utaha in that way. He only saw her as a friend he could talk to about books. Eriri also mentioned that Tomoya only cared about Metronome of Love, its characters, and its author. That's when Utaha suddenly approached and cornered Eriri. She introduced herself as a second-year student from Class 2D and revealed that her pen name was Yutaka Kasumi. Eriri was completely shocked to learn that Utaha was the author of Metronome of Love. She never saw it coming. That night at home, she was frustrated that the author of Metronome of Love had to be someone at her school. Eriri was so upset that she even forgot to ask for Utaha's autograph earlier that day. Originally, Tomoya had told Eriri about the book by leaving a copy of Metronome of Love in her locker and telling her that it was the best book he had ever read. Eriri read it and found the story incredibly touching. At school, she planned to meet Tomoya on the rooftop, but she was shocked to find him already deep in conversation with Utaha about the book. After what had happened earlier that day, there was no way Eriri would have the courage to ask Utaha, the author of Metronome of Love, for an autograph. That day, Tomoya was at a cafe with Utaha when she suddenly asked him about Eriri. The question caught Tomoya off guard, making him choke on his drink. He quickly asked why Utaha was bringing up Eriri, to which she casually replied that it was nothing. She had just heard that Eriri was a well-known first-year student at school and was curious if Tomoya knew her. Tomoya responded that he didn't really know Eriri that well. They were in different classes, had different hobbies, and even came from different hometowns. Utaha seemed intrigued and mentioned that she had heard Eriri was half British. Tomoya then explained that Spencer was her father's surname, while Sawamura was her mother's. Her father worked at the British Embassy and met her mother while stationed in Japan. Utaha asked what kind of person Eriri really was since she had never heard any bad rumors about her. She also noted that despite coming from an upper-class background, Eriri seemed to get along with everyone. Tomoya, however, dismissed this, saying that Eriri was just putting on an act, Deep down, she was selfish, stubborn, and quite annoying. Hearing Tomoya talk so much about Eryuri, Utaha raised an eyebrow and asked if he actually spoke with her often. Tomoya denied it, saying that Eryuri barely talked to him at school. She had even forbidden him from speaking to her in public, and if there was ever something important, she would just send him a message on his phone. Tomoya sighed, wondering how long she planned to keep acting that way toward him. Suddenly, Utaha started shaking her leg, making the entire table tremble. Tomoya glanced at her and asked if something he said had upset her. Utaha calmly stated that she wasn't angry, but Tomoya called her out, saying that was a lie. In response, Utaha smirked and said that Tomoya was lying to her as well. The next day, Utaha went to the art club room looking for Eryuri. However, one of Eryuri's friends blocked the entrance, preventing her from going inside. The friend even mentioned that the room had practically become Eryuri's private studio, and even as an official club member, she wasn't allowed to enter. Utaha scoffed and asked if Eryuri was getting special treatment just because she was the blonde-haired rich girl. The friend quickly denied it, saying that Eryuri wasn't treated like that at all. She spoke with her fellow first-year students, just like everyone else. Utaha shrugged and said that made sense considering they were all in the same grade, but then pointed out that first-year students should still show more respect to second years like herself. Ignoring the warnings, Utaha forcefully opened the art club room. The friend panicked and tried to stop her, saying that Eryuri wasn't there at the moment, but Utaha didn't care. She locked the door behind her when she was inside. The friend anxiously called out, worried more about getting in trouble with the teachers than about Eryuri. Inside the room, Utaha glanced around and found sheets of paper with Eryuri's illustrations, along with her artist name printed on them. The following morning, Eryuri arrived at school as usual. Many of her friends greeted her, and she responded with her usual friendly demeanor. However, she suddenly heard someone calling her name. She turned to respond and was shocked to see that it was Utaha. Her reaction made her friends stop in their tracks, staring in confusion at the scene. Trying to keep her composure, Eryuri greeted Utaha back. Her friends were puzzled, wondering why Utaha was speaking to Eryuri. Ignoring them, Utaha asked Eryuri if they could have a private chat. She then led Eryuri to the rooftop. Once there, Eryuri frowned and asked why Utaha had gone out of her way to bring her to such a secluded place. Utaha smirked and said that she had visited Eryuri's private studio the day before. Then, without hesitation, she revealed what she had discovered: Eri Kashiwaji, a member of the adult Doujin circle Egoistic Lily. Utaha held up her phone displaying Eryuri's artwork. She casually remarked that Eryuri was a well-known illustrator with a strong following at every event, particularly among male fans aged 17 and up. Eryuri felt embarrassed and asked how Utaha could know about it. Utaha had found the name tag on the picture from the internet the day before. Eryuri then asked what Utaha wanted from her. Eryuri suspected that Utaha might be trying to blackmail her, threatening to keep her identity a secret or perhaps snap her fingers and call her male followers to attack her. It would be impossible for her to fight back, and those male followers would probably grin at her. Utaha asked Eryuri not to compare this situation with the adult comics. Eryuri then wondered if Utaha was going to smirk at her and call her a knave girl. But Utaha actually said that Eryuri could just draw it herself and even called her a creator of cheap adult comics. Eryuri asked why Utaha was searching for her identity. Utaha paused for a moment and asked why Eryuri was hiding her identity. Eryuri replied, saying that wasn't Utaha herself also hiding her identity as a light novel writer. Utaha explained that she never meant to hide it, it's just that no fool would dare talk to her, except for Tomoya. Utaha then asked when Eryuri started drawing. It turned out that Eryuri had been drawing since second grade in grade school and had kept it hidden all this time. Eryuri was tired of being called a maniac, and it was so embarrassing. Utaha pointed out that such thoughts didn't hold any value anymore in their time. Eryuri asked Utaha not to act like she understood what it was like to be teased and laughed at every day. Even the teachers didn't understand. In fact, even her one and only friend had distanced herself from her. Eryuri just wanted to talk about the games and cartoons she loved with a friend. Utaha then gave Eryuri a handkerchief to wipe her tears. Utaha realized that what motivated Eryuri was her unpleasant childhood experience. Utaha said that Eryuri didn't draw to make others happy, but rather, more to seek revenge. Eryuri responded by saying that Utaha didn't write to entertain others because she never truly entertained anyone and basically just looked down on them. Eryuri mentioned that the readers of Utaha's light novels weren't touched out of empathy, but because they had been calculated. She said Utaha only played with people's emotions with her technique. If Utaha thought Eriri's motivation was revenge, that might be true, but Eriri thought that Utaha had no motivation at all, and that was far worse. Eriri was even surprised she had been fooled into liking a writer with no emotions. Utaha then asked if that was Eriri's opinion about Metronome of Love. Utaha said that even if their works were made out of revenge or calculation, if they still managed to touch someone, it meant that they had lost. Eriri got upset and said that Utaha was belittling her readers. But Utaha didn't mean it that way. It turned out that Utaha truly admired the work Eriri created in the art room. Utaha then thanked Eriri for saying that she had played with her readers' emotions using her technique, which in other words was the highest compliment for a writer. Eriri asked if Utaha also played with techniques to flirt with men. Utaha responded by saying that was an accusation from someone who used erotic works to attract men, and it wouldn't affect her at all. Eriri then asked what kind of relationship Utaha had with Tomoya. Utaha asked back what Eriri's relationship with Tomoya was. Eriri said she was Tomoya's childhood friend, but Utaha responded that relationships are defined by time. Not wanting to lose, Eriri then said that love at first sight is easily forgotten. Utaha replied that childhood friends were the typical loser characters in cartoons or games. Eriri said that older female protagonists only appeared in a handful of games. Utaha said that characters with blonde hair from foreign lands were just supporting protagonists. They continued to argue back and forth, neither willing to give in. That was the start of their acquaintance a year ago. That afternoon during a meeting, Tomoya said that they should first focus on the things they had agreed upon and then think about the next steps slowly. Eriri agreed and Utaha said she would think it through at her own pace. Tomoya wrapped up the meeting for the day, but before leaving, he asked Utaha and Eriri to sign a card. Tomoya thought it was a good idea to mark the launch of the game at the Winter Art Festival, as well as to use it as a promotional tool and a symbol of their circle's success. He requested an illustration from Eriri to be placed in the center of the card, with Eriri's signature on the right and Utaha's signature on the left. Tomoya also asked that the character featured in the illustration be Meguri. Eriri asked why she had to draw the illustration. Tomoya explained that it could be used as a promotional item and placed at their booth during the Winter Art Festival. Utaha then asked where the signed cards would be placed before the festival. Tomoya said they would be displayed in a place that they all frequently visited. Utaha guessed that they would probably be placed in Tomoya's own room, and Eriri jokingly asked if this was made for himself. Utaha mentioned that a signed card from Yutaka Kasumi and Eri Kashiwaji could fetch a pretty high price at an online auction. Eriri then replied that it seemed like it was the signature itself that was valuable, and if it were paired with the signature of an unknown writer, it would lose its meaning. Not wanting to back down, Utaha called Eriri an illustrator who hadn't had a professional debut yet. Tomoya explained that those signed cards were treasures to him that he wouldn't sell, as he had wanted them ever since he started the group. To him, the two signatures represented the greatest collaboration. Eriri quickly drew the illustration on the card, and they were all amazed at her skill. Megumi then asked Eriri if she could make one for her as well. It turned out that not only Tomoya wanted the card, but Megumi herself had also longed for Eriri and Utaha's signatures. Eriri didn't mind giving her signature, and Megumi immediately went off to buy the signed cards. Utaha asked Megumi to get an extra card for her, and Eriri also requested one for herself. Megumi quickly left to purchase them. That night, Utaha finished her script. She immediately called Tomoya to let him know that she had completed her part, and reminded him of his promise to spend Saturday with her. Utaha suggested they meet at 9:30 p.m. and asked him not to be late, as she would be waiting for him until he arrived. On Saturday, they met at a bookstore. Tomoya wanted to start a conversation with Utaha, but she told him that she preferred if he didn't talk to her while she was reading. Tomoya asked how long they would be staying there. Utaha requested that they stay until she finished reading the entire series. Tomoya hoped this was just a joke, but the Utaha he knew when she was deeply focused on a book was beyond reason. In other words, she was completely lost in her own world. Utaha asked Tomoya to wait calmly until she finished reading all the books, also pointing out that Tomoya wouldn't want to disturb others in the bookstore. Tomoya replied that the bookstore was there to sell books, not for people to read them for free. Utaha then told him to wait while she bought the books. They left the bookstore with one complete series. Tomoya was surprised at how many books Utaha had bought, especially since it was just the first store they had visited. Utaha explained that she had been too busy writing and hadn't had the time to read. Eriri had been observing Utaha and Tomoya from afar the entire time. Not long after, Megumi showed up to meet Eriri. Eriri complained that Megumi was late, but Megumi explained that just 30 minutes ago, Eriri had suddenly contacted her while she was still in her pajamas. Eriri blamed Megumi for being late, causing her to miss Utaha and Tomoya's departure. Megumi didn't even realize that Eriri had been spying on them. Meanwhile, Utaha and Tomoya went to a cafe and Tomoya congratulated her on finishing her script. Utaha thanked Tomoya, referring to him as a term of endearment. She then asked him to be quiet because she was focused on reading an exciting part of the book. Tomoya was puzzled as to why Utaha was so absorbed in reading, especially since it was she who had asked to go out that day to celebrate her achievement. Utaha explained that her curiosity had overtaken her, surpassing both her appetite and interest in men. Tomoya started to get irritated because Utaha was admitting this with her usual flat expression. Utaha told him she would finish soon and asked Tomoya to eat first. Tomoya began eating and then invited Utaha to watch a movie after she was done reading. Utaha agreed, so Tomoya quickly started picking a movie. Utaha suggested whether there was a lousy live-action film adaptation that would disappoint the fans of the original work. Tomoya said that while there might be such films, he wouldn't mention any titles. Meanwhile, Eriri was frustrated because she had failed to catch up with Tomoya and Utaha. Megumi asked how Eriri knew that Tomoya and Utaha were out together and how Eriri ended up at the same place as them. Eriri explained that she was just out shopping and happened to see them. Megumi seemed skeptical, even mentioning that it was also a coincidence that she had seen them at the Rokutenbo Mall. Eriri realized that Megumi was very perceptive, so she tried to reassure her that it was all just a coincidence. Megumi then mentioned that it seemed like she had seen Tomoya and Utaha in line at the cinema. Eriri complimented Megumi on her clever tactics in stealing attention. It couldn't be underestimated. Eriri quickly ran toward the cinema. After Tomoya and Utaha finished watching the movie, they stopped by a cafe. Utaha commented that although the sequel's TV adaptation had been turned into a movie, it still wasn't great. However, Tomoya thought the new character was sweet and the final scene left a lasting impression on him. Utaha mentioned that the film was impressive because of its character design and acting, even though the script was very cliched. However, the good visuals and interesting performances managed to cover that up. Tomoya, as a fan, felt that instead of criticizing the script, it was better to just praise the characters and acting. For Utaha, that was just praise from fans, which wouldn't help the creators grow. Tomoya responded that even though Utaha said that they were just fans, Utaha didn't care whether it was a joke or anything else. She preferred that the director who was going to produce her script didn't just throw stones and hide his hands. She told Tomoya that he needed to be sharp and brave enough to say if something was good or bad. Tomoya understood that he needed to be sharp, but he didn't quite understand what she meant by brave. Utaha explained that he had to be brave enough to speak his mind without exceptions, even when evaluating her work. Tomoya then asked if that wouldn't make Utaha angry. Utaha replied that there was nothing more valuable than receiving criticism from fans. However, if the criticism was too painful, she probably wouldn't speak to that person again. Meanwhile, Eriri and Megumi were also at the cafe. Eriri was even crying while reading a book. She apologized to Megumi for having to see her like that. Megumi commented that Eriri was someone who easily got emotional. Eriri was crying because she hadn't expected Mariko to be made the female protagonist, as it wasn't like that in the original series. Moreover, Koi, the male protagonist, decided to let go of Yui, the female protagonist in the TV series, leaving Mariko, who had always been by his side since childhood. Eriri felt so relieved that the story didn't end like it did in the TV version. When Tomoya and Utaha left the cafe, Megumi asked if it wasn't better for them to leave too. Unfortunately, Eriri didn't care. She still wanted to continue discussing the story in the book. That night, Tomoya and Utaha ended their outing with a meal at a restaurant after shopping. Utaha commented that Tomoya looked very tired from carrying all her shopping bags. Tomoya mentioned that her purchases should have just been delivered directly, but some of them were things Utaha wanted to read right away, so she decided to take a few home with her. Tomoya congratulated Utaha on finishing her script. Utaha apologized for taking longer than she had promised earlier. Tomoya understood because Utaha still had a novel to work on. Utaha then mentioned that starting from that point, her task was done and maybe she wouldn't be hanging out with Tomoya's circle as often since she needed to focus on finishing her novel. Additionally, she had to start thinking about her future. Utaha wasn't too worried about university because she was sure she would receive invitations. There were 2 universities with programs that suited her, one of which was in the Kansai area.